The French President Emmanuel Macron...
The French president has come under fire. Emmanuel Macron has said that Europe should avoid being caught up in such conflicts.
French President Macron has said that France won't be a US vassal on Taiwan.
The French President Emmanuel Macron and the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, are in Beijing, where they're holding talks with the Chinese leadership.
Macron's partnership with China shocks Europe and the US. Is it time to forge a middle way? The French President Emmanuel Macron's recent visit to China has drawn criticism from the US and Europe. While some accuse Macron of appeasing China, others suggest that he is showing pragmatism in recognizing that France's economy is dependent on Chinese money. France's reliance on China is largely due to the success of the luxury goods conglomerates LVMH, Hermes, and L'Oreal, which account for a significant percentage of the CAC 40 index, with China being their biggest market. The French economy is now dependent on the bling economy, and the interest it generates for investors is keeping the country and the stock market afloat. While there is nothing wrong with that in itself, the French economy is now uniquely vulnerable to any change in tastes, and there is no more fickle market than fashion. Macron's recent visit to China has sparked controversy in the US and Europe. Many accuse the French president of appeasing China and compromising foreign policy for economic gain. Macron's visit coincided with Chinese jets flying across the Taiwan Strait in a series of drills, and his remarks about Europe not needing to become entangled in a geopolitical conflict between the US and China were seen as provocative. Macron suggested that Europe should concentrate on its own strategic interests and turn itself into a third superpower. The French economy's reliance on China is largely due to the success of the luxury goods conglomerates LVMH, Hermes, and L'Oreal. Last week, LVMH reported booming sales with a 17% overall increase in revenues, double the previous estimates given by analysts. Asia, excluding Japan, which will mostly mean China, now accounts for a third of its revenue and has overtaken the US as its largest market. Similarly, Hermes reported sales up by 23%, driven by sales of its popular Birkin bags in the US and China. L'Oreal is not doing quite so well, but its sales in China were still up in its latest results. The French fashion and luxury goods triumvirate now dominates the French stock market to an extent that few people have yet taken on board. Bernard Arnault's fashion colossus dominates Paris's CAC 40 index, and it is now worth 447 billion euros, close to 20% of the total value of the CAC 40 index. If you add in a L'Oreal worth 225 billion euros and Hermes worth 206 billion euros, the French fashion and luxury goods triumvirate accounts for a little under 40% of the total for the CAC 40. Over the last 2 decades, France has essentially been turned into a fashion house with a country attached. France's reliance on China is not unique. Companies across the globe need to find markets to peddle their products and services, boosting their nation's prosperity in the process. However, the French economy is now uniquely vulnerable to any change in taste. The bling economy is keeping the country and the stock market afloat, and the main and most lucrative market for all those high-end handbags and perfumes is now China. There are 2 big problems with France's reliance on the bling economy. The first is that there is no more fickle market than fashion. If a different kind of handbag took China by storm, the French economy would be at risk. The second problem is that France's dependence on Chinese money could compromise its foreign policy. Macron's recent visit to China has been seen as a compromise of French foreign policy for economic gain. Perhaps France should not slavishly follow US foreign policy by acting as a vassal. Maybe the EU should try and forge a middle way between 2 major global powers. Suddenly, the market for their products could disappear, and with it, the fortunes of France's economy. The second problem is that relying on China for growth means making compromises on other issues, such as human rights and political freedom. And it is not just the French who are in this situation. Many Western countries have become economically dependent on China, and it is becoming increasingly difficult to balance the economic benefits with concerns about China's human rights record and its aggressive foreign policy. So, what is the solution? It is easy to say that countries should stand up to China on human rights and political freedom, but it is much harder to do so when there is so much at stake economically. One possibility is for Western countries to work together to reduce their economic dependence on China. This could involve diversifying their trade relationships and investing in new industries that are less vulnerable to shifts in the global economy. It could also involve finding ways to reduce their reliance on Chinese money, whether through reducing debt or finding new sources of investment. At the same time, countries should continue to speak out on human rights and political freedom, even if it means taking a hit economically. This is not just a moral imperative, it is also a strategic one. The more countries that stand up to China, the more likely it is that China will moderate its behavior. And the more countries that are seen as standing up to China, the less likely it is that China will be able to isolate them. In the end, the French president's partnership with China may have shocked some in Europe and the US, but it is a reflection of the economic realities facing many Western countries. The challenge now is to find a way to balance economic interests with concerns about human rights and political freedom, and to do so in a way that does not leave countries vulnerable to economic blackmail from China. Furthermore, the Chinese market is notoriously difficult to navigate. Companies have to deal with unpredictable government regulations, intellectual property theft, and the risk of being pushed out of the market by Chinese competitors. This makes the dependence of the French economy on the Chinese market all the more precarious. Another problem is that France's reliance on a few large luxury goods companies leaves the rest of the economy vulnerable. Other industries may be struggling, with high unemployment rates and limited growth prospects. This is particularly problematic given the country's high taxes and large state sector. If France is to maintain its economic stability, it needs to diversify its economy and reduce its reliance on the luxury goods industry. This will be a difficult task, but it is essential if France wants to avoid being held hostage to the whims of the Chinese market. Macron's partnership with China may have shocked Europe and the US, but it is a logical move given France's economic situation. However, it is also a risky move that could backfire if China's economy takes a downturn or if the French luxury goods industry falls out of favor with Chinese consumers. The EU may need to find a middle way between the US and China, but France may not have that luxury. The country needs to do what is necessary to maintain its economic stability, even if it means compromising on foreign policy. In conclusion, Macron's partnership with China is a reflection of France's economic reality. The country is heavily reliant on a few large luxury goods companies that are increasingly dependent on the Chinese market. While this partnership may be necessary for France's economic stability, it is also a risky move that could backfire in the long run. The French president talks a good game on strategic autonomy, on European sovereignty, and on finding a third way between the two great powers of the 21st century. This may make him an unreliable ally for the US, the UK, and everyone else. What do you think of France's increasing economic dependence on China and Emmanuel Macron's partnership with China? Is it worth compromising foreign policy for economic gain? Or should France try to find a middle way between the US and China? Let us know in the comments section below. Lastly, if you found this video helpful, please hit the like button. Your likes help our video to rank higher in the YouTube algorithm, which means that more people will be able to find and benefit from our content. Thank you again for watching, and we look forward to seeing you in the comments section in the future videos.